Who are the favourites for the World Cup final? We're finally here. 2 teams left, the All Blacks, the Springboks. 40 plus matches, whatever it is, a tournament that started way back near the beginning of September, and we're reaching the end of October, and we have 2 teams remaining. New Zealand against South Africa, the biggest rivalry in world rugby. So who are the favourites for it? Who are the favourites for the World Cup final? Who are the favourites to win their 4th title and be out on their own with the most World Cup titles? Let me know in the comments. What do you make of it? Who do you think is favourites going into this game based upon the form, the style of rugby that they both play, what we've seen so far? You can have your comment down below, and also like the video as well. That just boosts it and gets it to as many people as possible, so I'd appreciate that. And also subscribe to the channel as well. But with that question in mind, let's get into it. So first things first, I think this is a great matchup. And maybe it's more of a Northern Hemisphere thing, but I think for a lot of neutrals, there's been an element of disappointment that neither France or Ireland are in the final. And I can imagine that would rub New Zealand and South African fans up the wrong way. And I don't think it's meant as a disrespect. I think it's meant more just of what an occasion it would have been had France at home got to the final, or Ireland with their travelling support and the way that team were playing had got to the final as well. But from my point of view, I think this is a really brilliant matchup, partly because of what I mentioned in the intro. Both teams on 3 World Cups already, fierce rivalry, the first team to get to a 4th. Also, the Springboks looking to go back-to-back. The only other team that has done that is the All Black team of 2011 and 2015, and they're generally held up as being the best rugby team that we've ever seen. So if South Africa do win, what would it mean for them in terms of where they rank in the pantheon of great international sides? That's maybe a bridge we cross should they win the final on Saturday. And to me, this kind of feels like a bit of a trilogy fight in a way, to use a boxing analogy, in that you look at it this year, we had the Rugby Championship, New Zealand won that match where they were brilliant in the first half an hour. The Springboks did come back into it, but New Zealand kind of blew them away in the first half an hour or so. We then had the game at Twickenham where South Africa utterly dominated them. Still one of the best occasions that I've been at, actually, even though it is just a World Cup warm-up. That was a brilliant evening in southwest London. And now we've got the trilogy fight. The winner takes all, the bragging rights, the world title, all on the line, nothing after this game. I think that's quite an interesting complexion coming into this match, because those 2 games we've seen them play so far this year have been so contrasting. I think the reality is we probably get a game that is in the middle of those 2, but we will wait and see. Now, my first question for you for this video, in terms of looking at the conundrum of who are favourites for the World Cup final, is does form matter coming into a final? Because I think this Rugby World Cup has taught us actually not as much as we perhaps think, in that when a lot of the top sides have played in this tournament, certainly if we want to look at South Africa against Ireland, then the 2 quarterfinals, Ireland against New Zealand and France against South Africa, when the top teams have played each other, it has come down to the smallest of margins. You look at France and their unbelievable home record. They ran into the All Blacks in that quarterfinal and they were just better than them on the day and got the victory. Likewise, Ireland, that incredible winning streak, #1 team in the world, etc., etc. They run into the Springboks and on their day, the South Africans were the better team. And even if you look at the semi-final between England and South Africa to a degree, England heavy underdogs for that match, but form can kind of go out of the window in these sorts of matchups. So that's why I kind of feel like maybe the form of these teams doesn't matter as much as some people possibly expect. So you can let me know if you agree or disagree. What I do think matters though, and a different question is, do the semi-finals matter? And I'm not talking about form here. I'm talking about the fact that New Zealand had the game won by half-time. They didn't even need to bring Scott Barrett back from his sin bin. They opted to play the last 5 minutes with 14 men rather than 15. They utterly dominated Argentina and were not as troubled physically, wouldn't have been troubled as mentally because the game wasn't as intense. As I said from my report at the Stade de France, it was a pretty flat occasion in all honesty. So New Zealand, I think, will be better rested. Plus, they have the extra day's rest as well, whereas you compare that to the Springboks, and you look at what that squad have had to deal with to get just to this point, and they deserve a huge amount of commendation for it. Coming through the toughest pool in World Cup history. Yes, they lost to Ireland, but they still qualified second in the group. Then beating France by just the slimmest margin, beating England by 1 point as well, and also being second best for most of that game, but somehow getting themselves back into it. You feel like South Africa have been so challenged to get to this point. And I suppose within that, there's the old age question of, is that better for them because they're truly battle hardened, whereas New Zealand haven't been tested as much? Although, of course, I know the Ireland game was a ridiculous test, but you know what I mean in terms of where these two teams are. And I just wonder whether New Zealand have the slight edge because of that semi-final and the things that I mentioned. I think they will be better rested. I think they will have been less stressed over this last week compared to what the Springboks had to go through against England. Maybe it doesn't matter, I don't know, but I do think that could be a factor. But let's look at these individual teams then and look at how do they win this game? What are their big attributes for them to be able to beat their opposition? And starting with New Zealand, I think playing at pace is crucial. We've seen that now with this side. When they get parity up front or dominate up front, when they get themselves on the front foot, they are absolutely lethal. And their red zone efficiency against Argentina in the semi-final was utterly ridiculous. There was one point in the game where it was pretty much every time they got into the Pumas 22, they were coming away with a try, whereas up the other end, Argentina were throwing everything they had at the All Blacks, and they came away with 6 points, I think, after having numerous phases in the New Zealand 22. So New Zealand's ability to play at pace, absolutely crucial. And we saw that as well, going back to that game that New Zealand already won against South Africa this year. The pace they put on the ball, the forward momentum they got in the first half an hour of that game was the difference in the end. And also, I suppose, the variety of their kicking game is the other thing, because I think that's been another very notable thing for this All Blacks team. Looking at the quarterfinal against Ireland, they varied it up massively. Little dinks over the top, some longer kicks, they kicked to compete. And we saw that again against South Africa in the Rugby Championship, that game that New Zealand won. They probably did to the Springboks a little bit what England did to their back three on the weekend. Kick to compete, get it back, tap it back on your own side, win the second balls, win it back, turn the defence. That's something that New Zealand, I think, could target against the Springboks in this game. The tactical matchup will be fascinating. From a South African point of view, I mean, it's physical dominance, isn't it? I think when you look back at that game at Twickenham, they utterly dominated New Zealand. And there were injuries in that game for the All Blacks, which they might point towards. There were players getting sent off that they might point towards as well. But we know that this Springbok team has the potential to dominate teams, and they're able to counter-attack, in particular, like we saw against the French as well. Those 3 tries they scored in a blink of an eye without having built up too much pressure or without having to go through too much phase play. But they are so lethal when they are able to exploit the space in behind. And the final thing I will mention for South Africa is their defence. And this is maybe a really, really key point in that, going back to what I said earlier, where generally when the top sides have met each other in this competition, it has been tight. There has not been too much between them. And even you look at England and how well England played against South Africa, they didn't even look like scoring a try. Now, New Zealand have a far, far better attack than England. I know that. But the point being, defence is going to be key for the Boks, I think. And because they're such a defensively solid team, you feel like they will be able to keep themselves in the game if they're on the back foot, or it could be a lot harder for New Zealand to break them down. So those are just a few of the areas that I've picked out that are going to be key. There's obviously loads of others, and you can put them in the comments section. What are you looking at the moment? I suppose front five as well. Front five has been the biggest area of improvement for the All Blacks over the last 18 months. The biggest area, I think, that points towards the reason that backline has been able to be so destructive at times. They have massively improved in that area. Can they get parity in that area? We will wait and see. But I think it's going to be a brilliant matchup. Put your comment down below. First of all, who is going to win? And second of all, I've gone through a few things there that I think are key points. You can respond to them. You can add to them. Let's have a good discussion about this. But the build-up starts here. Monday, game on Saturday. Right now, who are the World Cup favourites? Do you know what? I think I would give the edge to the All Blacks because of the semi-final they had to come through. But frankly, who knows? And I hope it's a great game. When we have seen a number of the teams play each other in this World Cup, the top teams play each other, they've been brilliant games. In fact, if you think about all the knockout games we've had, only that All Blacks Argentina game hasn't been great. All of the 4 quarterfinals were brilliant, and England against South Africa, even though maybe not the most entertaining game, was thrilling, went down to the wire, dramatic. It's actually been a really good knockout stage of the World Cup, so let's hope that that continues. I look forward to reading your comments. A final reminder, you know what I'm going to say, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.